promised, I'm going to be talking to you today about my research in Oaxaca, but I'm also going to talk about the events that led me to that research and eventually to grad school. The path to finding one's passion, especially in this field, is not always clear or linear, and I'd like to spend some time today talking about the messy journey that has led me to finding a really life-giving, generative, and sustainable passion, and then tell you about my research, because it's really cool. In the mid-90s, this book came out called The 5 Love Languages. You might be familiar with it. Basically, this author, Gary Chapman, asserts that there are 5 ways that people express and receive love. The 5 love languages, according to him, are quality time, receiving gifts, words of affirmation, acts of service, and physical touch. My mother loves to point out that from a very young age, she could tell that my love language was receiving gifts. And she's totally right. I love getting gifts. I love things. Sue me. Okay, so this mug was one of the first gifts that I ever received. Looking at this mug objectively, I would not say it's particularly beautiful or impressive in any way, really. The box here says 11-ounce stoneware coffee mug on it. It was mass-produced in Korea. It has all these borderline gaudy hearts on the outside and 4 tiny ones on the inside. I bet if you looked, you could probably find a mug pretty similar to this one in the kitchen section of any Goodwill in any city in the United States. I've been a potter for nearly 7 years, and truth be told, there are about 100 reasons why I should hate this mug. But this mug, this made in a factory in China, borderline gaudy 90s mug, is my most prized possession. These mass-produced hearts right here feel very personal to me. My grandmother died of ovarian cancer when I was a baby. When she was very ill and knew she didn't have much longer to live, she ordered this mug for me from a catalog and told my mom that when I was old enough, she should give it to me and let me use it each year on my birthday, which happens to be Valentine's Day. My mom didn't wait very long. I think she let me use it for the first time on my 3rd birthday, about 2 years after my grandmother passed. And I've used it every single year since then. In a big way, it's how I got to first know my grandmother. When I was younger, I used to wake up on the morning of my birthday and sit at the kitchen table sipping orange juice out of it while my mom made me breakfast. Now that I'm older, I make my own breakfast and drink coffee out of it. And every year, before the day is over, I hand wash it, dry it very carefully off with a towel, return it to its box, and put it up on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet until the next year. It is through this ritual that I first learned the connection between objects and relationships, and also that the most compelling part of a pot is not always how it looks. One of the ways that I've been exploring these threads in my own practice is through my studies in Oaxaca, Mexico. I first went to Oaxaca in September of 2015, but the events that led up to that trip actually began quite a few years earlier. I did my undergraduate degree at Loyola University in Chicago. I majored in international studies and minored in women and gender studies, anthropology, and studio art. Yeah, I know, I can't tell you how many times my academic advisor sat me down and pled with me to just pick something already. Advice I'm now so glad I didn't take. But anyway, my freshman year of college, I woke up one morning with a feeling I've never had before, and that feeling was, I need to throw a pot. So that spring I signed up for a ceramics class, and that was it. That's the whole story, really, of how I became a potter. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but it took me a good 2 years of making pots and working in a ceramic studio on a daily basis to realize that clay came from the ground. I helped mix up the 50-pound bags of material with water in a mixer and certainly interacted with the thing a lot, but it never really clicked for me until one day my college boyfriend gave me a Tupperware full of mud he had dug in his backyard and said, "Here, I took you some clay, make pots with it." And I was like, thanks. And then a couple seconds later I was like, wait, what? After that I realized that clay came from the ground. At the right age of 20, I started getting really excited about digging my own clay. My ceramics professor in undergrad was super supportive and helped me plan a project digging clay and building pit fires at our school's ecology campus in rural Illinois during the summer after my junior year. That same summer, I also ended up digging clay in the mountains of Peru when I got really bored and realized I didn't want to be an archaeologist at Archaeology Field School. I loved the messiness that digging clay entailed, how it made me feel connected to the earth, but also how it connected me to people. It helped me feel like I had something tangible in common with these people who had made these 1,500-year-old pots we were digging up in the Andes. That is the first time I realized that clay is a language. The fall after I graduated college, I was working at a natural grocery store and nannying by day, and coil building pots and researching Native and Latin American ceramics by night. One of those nights, I came across an article about this group of women potters from a small pueblo in Oaxaca called San Marcos La Pasola. The article talked about how these women would harvest their own clay from under the cornfields on their families' farms, make pots out of that clay, and then fire them in these big, beautiful bonfires in the clearing between their houses. And while their pots were firing, I remember the article saying very specifically that they'd sit around watching telenovelas, drinking Pepsi, and burnishing pots together. When I read that line, I remember having this very visceral response. My whole body was like, I don't know how, but I gotta get down there and hang out with those ladies. That day, I began what became a year and a half of research for a Fulbright application, my first attempt at doing just that. About 6 months into that research, I was passed the email address of Eric Mindling, an incredible photographer, author, and one of the world's leading scholars on Oaxacan ceramics. It just so happened that he was also the person who had written that article I'd read about the potters in San Marcos, and that had spurred this whole thing in the first place. I sat with his email address on my desk for about a week and wrote him a very earnest, possibly overexcited email asking for advice. Eric wrote me back a couple of days later and basically took me under his wing. He has since become one of the most influential mentors of my life. He has given me invaluable advice and support, connected me with my now colleagues at the Mexican nonprofit Innovando la Tradición, wrote one of my reference letters for my Fulbright application, helped me edit my proposal and improve my writing skills, and when at the very final round of the Fulbright interviews I got turned down, he said, "Go anyway," and offered me a place to stay. Writing that silly, overly enthusiastic email is probably the single best thing I have ever done for my career. And I also think that the fact that I did just go anyway demonstrated commitment to learning and personal growth outside of the structure of an institution, which is what may have ended up setting me apart in the eyes of the schools I applied to, even though I didn't have a BFA or do a postbac. I might be wrong, but we can ask Carl about that afterwards. After getting over the disappointment of not getting the Fulbright, and that was a big disappointment, I saved a little money from every paycheck at my coffee shop job for about 8 months. Had a pop-up ceramics show where I made about $700 just from selling pots to 75 of my sweet and supportive friends, and then got on a plane to Oaxaca in September of last year. At that time, I spent 2 months doing what I referred to as apprenticeships with several different women potters in 5 villages. I hung out with a lot of old ladies, learned how to make pots using corn cobs, pieces of basketballs, gourds, and pieces of leather as tools. I ate more than my fair share of mole, improved my then not so great Spanish, and did a whole lot of listening. Going into that first trip, I was hyper aware of my whiteness and my privilege. I was well read on the history of colonialism and oppression in Mexico, all the messed up othering and exoticizing that had been done to brown bodies in the name of anthropology, border politics and Chicano studies, the list goes on. But what I didn't expect was how familiar many of the facets of the culture would feel to me because of the other parts of my life beyond my whiteness. For instance, I'm a woman. I come from a working class family in an agrarian community in central Indiana. My brother and I were raised by a single mother, a social worker, and our father worked as an auto body man for 30 plus years. Because of my background, I was able to understand very well the close held value of making a living from working with your hands, for example, of strong-willed women who take care of their families, of communities firmly rooted in agriculture. This is not to say that the politics of my whiteness are any less complicated, just that I had been doing to myself the exact thing I was overly conscious of not doing to the people I was working with, essentializing. Love of clay was also something I had in common with the women I apprenticed with. It common denominator, an entry point. In spending more time with these women, I started noticing that what I enjoyed most wasn't the actual technical making of the pots. It was the relationships and the storytelling that happened as a result of making side by side with someone, as a result of what I refer to as parallel making. I realized that what is most compelling to me are the offshoots, the side effects, the byproducts of clay work. I love how clay manages to so seamlessly embed itself in essential facets of human experience. Sharing meals, storytelling, ritual. Clay is democratic. It is community-oriented. It is both of the people and of the earth. Clay is my politics. Another big takeaway from that first trip was the importance of self-care in developing a sustainable, lifelong ceramic practice. Some of the self-care practices I saw women taking part of in Oaxaca were ergonomic working positions, always eating a big breakfast before starting to work, and taking a day off when you're on your period, among other things. This is probably one of the biggest influences Oaxaca has had on my ceramics practice, and was part of the impetus for developing the feminist potter hashtag, which I use on everything from making pots to doing yoga every morning to buying myself flowers. My Oaxacan pottery grandmas taught me that holistic creative practice starts outside the studio. I returned from my first trip to Oaxaca in November of last year and moved to Portland to begin my master's at OCAC this January. I decided to get my MFA in great part because I knew I wanted to teach ceramics. My dream for several years now has been to teach interdisciplinary ceramics courses that view Latin America as a major player in the history of ceramics and include topics like gender, anthropology, ecology, and history from first-person perspective. Components I feel like are often lacking in discourse surrounding ceramics. Since I've started at OCAC, I've always had a fat stack of books about pedagogy and teaching philosophy on my desk that I read in between making pots. And to be honest, it wasn't until this last summer that I started to view educational research as a large component of my creative practice. I returned to Oaxaca for a second time in May of this year. My second trip was very different from the first one. You'll be able to notice that difference in my slideshow from the drastic change in image quality and composition that just a semester of art school gave to my photography. Big thanks to Emily Natchison and my new iPhone. This second trip, I spent about 3 months living in Oaxaca City and working with the nonprofit I mentioned earlier, Innovando la Tradición, which means innovating the tradition in Spanish. Innovando is a creative platform where artisans, designers, and artists share skills, knowledge, and stories to rethink and honor the ceramic traditions of Oaxaca. They offer services to potters and pottery communities in Oaxaca that support the development of their trade. Innovando's goal is to elevate the symbolic, cultural, and commercial value of pottery in the world of today, while collectively building bridges, exploring the common ground between art design and folk art, and rethinking how they operate and interact. If you're not familiar with their work, you should really look it up. It's very cool. My main focus this past summer was working with Diego Mier y Terán, one of the founders and directors of Innovando, on creating an artisan-to-artisan educational program. The program is called Comunidad de Aprendizaje Alfarera, or Potters Learning Community. It is a unique interdisciplinary educational program created for and with the potters of Oaxaca, Mexico. Our main objective with this project is to make visible the local knowledge of clay craftspeople through documentation and exchange, and to also create this vibrant learning community of potters to chew through critical contemporary issues in areas like sustainability, gender, history, and design, among others. This project came from a need voiced by the potters to empower themselves in adverse socioeconomic environments. The work of these artisans lacks validation at the local level and serious recognition on a global level in the fields of art and craft. Issues like appropriation and cultural and economic colonization are a real threat to these communities and to the tradition of the craft in Oaxaca itself. For these reasons, Comunidad de Aprendizaje Alfarera strives to promote a constructive discourse that challenges the social, political, and economic processes that are destabilizing artisan communities, and to collect narratives and histories of those communities. Our goal is to cultivate confidence and leadership in the participants and create a community of shared knowledge that can rival the threats that they are facing. A good chunk of the summer, Diego and I spent gathering source material to build our methodology from. Our main pedagogical influences are Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, Black Mountain College, and Campesino a Campesino, which is a grassroots Latin American sustainable agriculture movement. All the reading that I had been doing that first semester of grad school finally had a place and made sense. And I remember all of those seemingly disjointed majors and minors that my advisor told me I was crazy to pursue. They all seemed to make sense here. Another big part of our planning for the Potters Learning community has been doing mesas de trabajo, or working tables with the artisans. Diego and I went out to several different pueblos and sat around talking through ideas for the program with potters. The idea for this program had originally come from them. How could we possibly create the program without them? These discussions became fodder for the content of the curriculum and ended up changing and improving the direction we were going in at several turns. The pilot of our program is set to roll out in January of 2017. In addition to getting feedback on our curriculum from artisans, we have also been sending it to other colleagues in the fields of education and art history and craft. Diego and I are both creatives, but we're also academics. In a recent meeting, one of our advisors asked us, if your goal is truly to elevate and privilege local knowledge, why are you using academic words like objectives and methodology? If you truly believe in the pertinence of local knowledge, put your money where your mouth is and use those terms. That comment has really stuck with me and changed the way we're thinking not only about our program, but also how I'm thinking about my own education. My master's research is similar to my work within Ovando in that it centers around exploring the ways that local and haptic knowledge can be in conversation with academic knowledge. I had a studio visit with a visiting artist last week, and after getting to know me and what I'm interested in a little bit, he said, I don't have the slightest idea what you're doing in an MFA program. You should drop out and get yourself into an art history PhD program staff. And while I don't disagree that that might be a more natural path for me to go down, I feel like if I truly believe that haptic knowledge, that is, knowledge gained from the sense of touch, is of equal value to intellectual knowledge, I feel like I have to put my money where my mouth is, which makes getting a degree in making essential to my thesis. If I was writing about the intelligence behind making from a purely academic standpoint and not making myself, what kind of logic would that be? Since coming back from Oaxaca this time, I've been able to better articulate why I make pots. Beyond the poetics of turning mud into beauty or being able to think better when I'm working with my hands, I make pots because I love being a part of this lineage of women potters who have found autonomy through craft. This is another reason why I continue to refer to myself as a feminist potter, because making pots for me is a feminist act. I know that no one asked me, but if we could all just pretend for a moment that you did, I'd love to end with sharing a little advice on the messy journey to finding your passion. Number one, if you're interested in something kind of off kilter and there's not a prescribed path for it, blaze your own trail. Number two, follow momentum. When you find something you're passionate about and things just seem to be flowing, chase that, follow it. If you come across something that really speaks to you, a piece of writing, a project someone did, a piece of art, a person's career you'd like to emulate, a gaudy mug, send the person who made it an email. They might not always get back to you, but they might just respond and change your life. I have found that passionate people often love hearing from and helping out their similarly passionate people. And then one day, you'll become the passionate person that someone emails on a whim, and the cycle will continue. Number four, if you apply for a grant with a project you're really excited about and don't get it, find another way to do it. It may seem like it, but the people doling out the money are not the ultimate deciders of worthwhile projects. And finally, number five, find yourself a good grandma. Thank you.